is an anomaly. In the 7th generation of gaming, the indie scene has seen all sorts of creative ventures that were surprisingly not done in a conventional way with game design of the time. Detractors often call the 7th generation of gaming as the rise of playable movies, whereas level design and gameplay are second fiddle to the cinematic cutscenes and story presentation, which of course alienated some people, especially gamers from older generations. And while some indie games were completely gameplay-centric to the point where any story is barely there, some indie games completely tie the story to the gameplay. How this can exactly be pulled off is where the sky is the limit. For example, here we have ThatGameCompany, an indie studio founded by Genova Chen and Kelly Santiago, and are more famous for their hit indie title Journey, as well as Flow, but another one of their titles that is highly revered in the gaming community is one I believe to be their greatest achievement: Flower. A simple game about controlling wind and just gathering petals of flowers. It's such a simple premise and sounds ridiculous and is only an hour long, but this game left a lasting impression on me. Hello everyone, Alec Alcher the SideQuest Gamer here, and you know what, it's about time I start ending this season, and this will be the second to the last episode of Season 5. I know it's been a while, and I should have ended things off with Mega Man 4 or 5 and the secret review, but you know what, I decided I'm going to save those for Season 6. It's a bit too much for me, so I'm going to end things off differently if that's alright. What do you mean that's not alright? It's my show, I get to do what I want! I'm sorry, I lost my cool for a minute there. So, instead of finishing off the Game Boy Mega Man retrospective, I'd like to take a look at Flower, a very interesting former PlayStation exclusive. So, Flower. Does this 7th generation game still hold up many years later? Let's find out. Flower was under the direction of Genova Chen with assistance from his colleague Nicholas Clark, and they had the goal of making it as what they described as an emotional shelter for the player, whatever that means. It began development in 2007 when they were still students at the University of Southern California, but it took 2 years to make, undergoing many changes, including what game mechanics and design decisions would go best with the emotions they wanted to capture with this experimental game. In fact, most of those 2 years was just spent prototyping. I'm not even kidding. When they finally settled on a concrete idea for the gameplay, it only took them 6 months to produce. But still, that is a long time. Props to them for perseverance. I appreciate that they won't sell for anything less than their best ideas. It was released on the PlayStation Network in 2009 to critical acclaim, and has only gained a bigger cult following when the more well-known and award-winning Journey was released in 2012. It was through Journey that I found out they made this game called Flower, and later when I saw a YouTuber, The Retro Replay, playing it for his Another Video Game Crash editorial, it looked like the coolest game at the time, with its atmosphere and its sense of freedom, and I really liked how the level was set at night. It's like, I'm a sucker for that kind of thing. It wasn't until 2017 when I bought the Journey collection for PS3 that I finally played that game I've wanted to play for so long. You see, I didn't have a job at the time due to being unemployed, so I had to rely on a few dollars a month from ad revenue, and eventually I accumulated enough money to buy the collection used. Ah yes, back in the good old days when I was unemployed, going to college part-time until that didn't work out, and then I was looking for a part-time to full-time job, and a job market that had practically nothing for inexperienced people. Ah yes, those were the days. And let me just tell you, just starting the game and seeing this title screen after selecting which game I wanted to play, that is the mood the game begins with, and is consistent with that mood for the most part. Until we see a busy metropolis and are taken to an unbloomed flower near a window that just looks out to an extremely depressing city. But it's okay, because after selecting the plant, we are taken to the first level where we find ourselves playing as a flower petal, controlled by the wind, and already you see that this is honestly one of the few games I would say that is better with the notorious 6-axis controls of the PS3 controller. Back then, so many games tried out the 6-axis controls, and they were often criticized for it, especially Factor 5's Lair, which was like a spiritual successor to Rogue Squadron. In fact, for that game, the 6-axis controls were panned so bad, they had to update it where you have the option to control it more traditionally, with a joystick and buttons. So especially for the time, it was really nice seeing that the 6-axis controls actually improving the experience rather than detracting from it. Just tilting the controller in various directions while pressing X to accelerate, it's just so seamless and adds to the immersion, making the player feel like the pedal. And the level communicates the ambiguous goal to the player, whether it be from a panning camera showing the next goal, the music cues for every time you collect a pedal to add to yourself, or which areas are full of color as opposed to which are barren and colorless. So what exactly happens if you do collect the brightly colored flower petals like the red ones? Well, more flowers with petals show up, and color in more of the levels shows up, unlocking it for you to progress. And while collecting the petals of the brightly colored plants are mandatory for finishing the level, there's also optional petals you can collect and even secret ones that can be found. The first level is amazing. It's simple, yet effectively teaches the player how to play the game without overbearing tutorials or heavy consequences, and the rest of the game excellently expands upon the ideas and tutorializes its goals. Like in the night level, for example, you see a sparkle swirl around various objects. So naturally, the player would imitate that and would be able to progress in the level. Everything else is straightforward. The sense of direction can easily be summed up with: follow the flowers, touch the special flowers, follow more flowers to the next objectives highlighted by the panning camera, wash, rinse, repeat, enter the swirly thing to finish the level. The end. It's simply relaxing. But does that mean it's more of an interactive experience and less of an actual game with challenges and obstacles to overcome? Like, what about the challenges? What about the obstacles? I want to be stressed out of my mind so I can yell at the television screen and release all my anger, even though they're just fictional characters who can't freaking hear me. Like, come on! That's what an actual video game is. It's supposed to make you mad! I might delete that later. I don't know. We'll see. One of the things I should be upfront about is that I am almost always hesitant in playing interactive experiences sold as a video game. A game to me has objectives, rewards for good performance, a difficulty curve, a beginning, and an end. I do strongly believe that interactive experiences that are sometimes referred to as walking simulators in a derogatory way have as much of a place in the industry as a video game with more traditional aspects like what I described earlier. But when it comes to aligning with my preferences, Flower manages to make this experience a game in its own right. But it comes from a matter of perspective. Challenge isn't introduced traditionally until you introduce it to yourself by analyzing the level select being these flowers in these pots. I noticed that the flower actually blooms more based on performance in the level, hence why the hardest level at first barely had any chance to bloom because I was zapped so many times to just a few petals when I finished. So the actual game is all in the amount of petals collected. Are you sure you collected as many petals as you could in the level? And this involves scouring every nook and cranny of each level, including the places you didn't think to look. Not to mention in the case of the power line infested level where getting zapped does mean losing collected petals, you have to explore and not touch the metal, which is easier said than done, especially near the end when you're going really fast and probably barely have any petals left on the first playthrough. This is challenge, and it has a difficulty curve set. Whereas the first level is easy and introduces you to the main mechanics and goals, the second expands upon this idea. The third level introduces fast-moving wind sections where you can easily miss hitting a flower and be unable to backtrack for it. The fourth level expands upon this idea by making it darker and, as a result, harder to see. The fifth level ups it with the electrical power lines, and then it stagnates back to being easier because it reached the story climax, with the credits level just being another level where it has a relaxing kind of feel. This is an interactive experience that uses game design elements to make it more worth revisiting, but I did test out whether you could die in the power line level. No, you can't. Even at the game's hardest level with the highest stakes yet, you only ever get zapped to one petal. You just can't die at all. But the consequence is a sad-looking potted plant after exiting the level, which can honestly make it sting a bit and make you want to revisit the level to try again and do a better job this time. Which reminds me, the story presentation in this game is phenomenal, even if it's one of the most basic and tried and true stories of all time, being nature versus machine. Oops, spoilers. For those who couldn't figure it out despite the content of all the levels, like come on, if you didn't think the power lines emerging out of the ground and being a harrowing threat to the pedals wasn't allegorical enough, I don't know what is. The story is simple. The menu looks out to a really depressing city that's all grey and colorless, so the potted plants are used as a transition device to show the polar opposite setting and what's going on in it. We see a beautiful grassy landscape filled with plants, and the first 3 levels convey the petals, making a journey that takes approximately a day, as indicated with the passage of time shown in the skybox. But at the end of the 3rd level, the serene night is interrupted by the reveal of power lines, and the music cues to be less relaxing and more dramatic. On my first playthrough, this turning point took me by surprise, as my once relaxing video game paradise tonally shifted to be a more disturbing, more suspenseful journey. My paradise established in the first 3 levels was being taken over by these cursed machines. Ah! You can take away our nature, but you'll never take away our freedom. Down with the machines! Wait a minute. Aren't we playing this on a machine made by plastic, which was made by fossil fuels? I declare hypocrisy! And it's not until the petals barely escape the power lines does the game reach its climax, where nature destroys the power lines, blooms more flowers throughout the city, and turns it from a drab, colorless concrete jungle to a more colorful concrete area where nature and machinery can coexist. Somewhat. Damn it! And I was going to expose that game company for their hypocrisy, and then they do this for an ending, which is very uplifting. Now what am I going to do with my sad excuse of a life? I'll make an angry Tumblr post. To be perfectly honest, as a game reviewer, it's nowhere near as fun describing the game as it is playing it and experiencing it firsthand, because it is strictly visual storytelling, in addition to music cues here and there conveying drama when presented. Not to mention the vibrations of the controller just add to the immersion of the sprawling grassy landscapes and the intense shaking of it during certain moments, giving a sense of losing control or accomplishing a goal, such as dissolving those battered power lines in the penultimate level. And at the end of this level, we reclaim the paradise we almost lost, and that just feels great. I feel a sense of accomplishment. I especially like how in between levels, the city gradually becomes more colorful and less noisy, furthering the sense of progress made throughout the game, as if your actions out in the grasslands have an effect even in the city off in the distance. That just gives off a very hopeful message to the player. I swear, this game is trying to turn me into a hippie. But seriously, it's a pretty good environmentally conscious narrative that isn't ham-fisted, nor is it pretentious. But as great as the visuals are, a lot of the credit goes to the spectacular soundtrack composed by Vincent Diamante, who was a music professor at the same college the creators went to. And the music just goes for a very natural, peaceful sounds with a classic guitar, violins, definitely some piano here and there, and I believe bassoons. It also comes together conveying a sense of freedom, like slowly flying around, drifting from hilltop to hilltop, and tracks like Splash of Color evolve this idea to make it feel more adventurous and grand, especially with the flute and the violins harmonizing together. The track Sailing on the Wind focuses solely on the more adventurous aspect and is more exhilarating. No longer is it peaceful and relaxed, it's a lot quicker but nonetheless upbeat. It's not until the track Nighttime Excursion when the once upbeat mood takes it down a notch. This piece is a lot more ambient and goes for a sense of loneliness. It's not necessarily depressing or anything, but it's noticeably slower paced. And man, when the power lines reveal themselves, the solitary Wastelands track really makes sure you feel empty and desolate, with a slower paced piano playing in a low key. Like man, that just makes you feel defeated in this war against technology. And that's like the only sad piece in the game, as the rest is what you would expect. Optimistic with a sense of freedom, and it all works given the context of the game and the levels they're in. In fact, the music is so heavily tied to the flower experience, it's practically a core element. Like, I remember trying to get this game to run on my new PC, but the sound wouldn't play properly until I fixed it. When the music wouldn't play, it took away so much from the experience that I refused to play it any further and immediately looked up solutions to the problem. Thankfully, it was resolved by playing around with the sound settings on my computer. And let me tell you, the music tracks discussed aren't all that is there to the sound design, as when collecting pedals as well as objective-specific ones, certain music cues would play, adding to the sense of satisfaction of collecting them. And when you would collect so many flower petals in a row, the music cues playing would form a piece. It just sounds so great to hear. So much care was evidently put into the compositions. I'm frankly surprised that Diamante isn't held in such high regard in the gaming community. I mean, a lot of people really like the soundtrack and will probably buy it on Steam, but I only first heard of this composer when I was researching this video, and I honestly asked why he doesn't get nominated for awards and accolades for this game. Regardless, at least we have the re-releases of this game so future generations can appreciate it. Now that it's on PC, it's no longer just the Sony ponies who can see and hear for themselves. And with all that said, Flower is no doubt the best game ThatGameCompany has ever created. It was one of my favorite PS3 exclusives back when I played the collection several years ago, and one generation later, it is still an overall great video game. Or interactive experience, whichever you prefer to call it, because it works either way. This game is relaxation incarnate. It's a game that doesn't demand a lot from the player other than their attention. Jenova Chen and Nicholas Clark, as well as others, set out to make an emotional shelter for the player, and in that regard, I believe they succeeded in their goal with flying colors, pun intended. It's a game that shelters the player not from negative emotions, but to rather play with these emotions. Experience the thrill of peace and tranquility, only for it to be interrupted by corruption and desperation, and even sadness, only for that to lead to the light at the end of the tunnel, and at the end experience the thrill of the lifetime and end off back to where we started in the credits level, peace and tranquility. And I won't lie, after having one more romp in the Twilight Grasslands, I was a little sad to see all the petals go up in the sky and have the experience finally end. It's a bittersweet end to the experience, all things considered, and I wouldn't have it end any other way, for it's time to come out of the emotional shelter. Alright, that's it for Flower. I'm out of the emotional shelter and back into real life. Yeah, real life. This sucks. And that is the last review for the season, but it's not the season finale. There's one last video I have to do, and it is the 5th anniversary Q&A special, and it's going to be one of the craziest, weirdest episodes I've ever made, and I'm going to do it in the most side-questian way possible. And despite it being mostly a Q&A format, it's going to be more entertaining than what a standard Q&A video would have. There's going to be announcements, guest appearances, a few skits here and there, but none that drag down the format of the Q&A, and the future of the SideQuest Gamer Review Show as we know it. But until then, which might be a while, this is going to be a pretty big video. Thank you all so much for watching, and remember to stay awesome. Development log number 13. I have finally completed the things I needed to get this show on the road. The finale show, let's just say it's gonna go out with a bang.